Hey everyone and welcome back. We are taking a deep dive today into something that, well, really blew up on Reddit.
Oh, yeah.
And honestly, it's such a fascinating topic. Okay, so the basic question was this. Do men keep, nudes from their exes?
Wow.
But it's the responses that are just wild. Like so many different opinions on what happens to those private pictures, after a relationship is over. It really makes you think about digital intimacy and all that.
Yeah, it really brings up that question of like, where do our personal lives and technology and all those social rules we have, where do they all intersect? We're talking about some pretty big stuff here. Trust, privacy, even consent, right? Especially in a world where it's so easy to share images, like literally one clip.
Exactly. And what's so crazy is how this one little question, right, it just brought out all these different opinions. Some people on Reddit were like, delete, delete, delete. They were all about respect and moving on, making a clean break.
Yeah, and you can definitely see the ethical argument there. One user, what was their name? Putrid something like.
Putridad 2256.
Yeah, that's the one. They said something like, there's no reason to keep them if I'd moved on. If I keep them, it means I haven't moved on. So for that person holding onto these images, it's almost like it stops you from growing and getting past the relationship.
That's a good point. But then you have other people saying it's totally harmless. They compare it to any other gift, like a sweater or a book or whatever. One person, Icevisor, said, should I return all gifts at the end of a relationship? Like, is it really the same thing? That's where things get kind of murky.
It's a really good question. And the whole gift argument, I think it forces us to look deeper at consent. Even if someone was totally happy to share a picture during the relationship, does that consent go on forever? Did they think about those photos being kept after the relationship ended? It gets tricky because now we're dealing with emotions, relationships changing, and this idea that what's digital is like permanently out there.
Right. And even if you personally have no plans to use those images to hurt someone, can you be sure everyone else would do the same? This thread had some people, well, it sounded like they were talking about like trophy albums and sharing without consent and things like that.
That's the scary part. We have to remember the potential for abuse. This isn't just about what one person chooses to do, but it's about the bigger picture, right? Like, image-based abuse is a real problem, and we can't pretend it doesn't exist.
And that brings up like an even bigger question. Can people even have digital intimacy ethically and safely? Because right now it feels like there are no rules. We're all just figuring this out as we go.
We absolutely need to talk about this more, and maybe by looking at different perspectives, we can start to create some, I don't know, some guidelines or a shared understanding of what's okay and what's not. One person, our cougar, said, I've never sent a nude or asked for one. I don't get how people do this, but hey, I appreciate them when I get them.
It's like that comment's from a different time, right? Makes you realize how much things have changed and how fast. We're all trying to adapt to this whole digital world.
And it's not just about catching up, though. It's about, like, intentionally shaping the future of what digital intimacy looks like. Another user, I think it was Bad Mufuka, said, not nudes, but I keep the sex videos. I'm over them, won't ever share them, but it's good spark material. My dick is so beautiful on Lmail.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, that's definitely honest. But seriously, it just shows how much we need to talk openly and honestly about expectations and boundaries. And the consequences too, right? Sharing these kinds of pictures, it's not without risk.
Absolutely. Someone might feel totally comfortable sharing something intimate in the moment, but those feelings can change, and those images, they can have a big impact. It can go either way, good or bad.
So what about you guys listening? Have you thought about this? What do you think about the ethics of keeping or deleting these photos when a relationship ends? Tell us in the comments, because this is something we all need to talk about.
We're all figuring this out together, right? The more we talk about it, the better we'll be at making good choices, choices that are respectful and responsible. It's interesting, right? This whole thread, it kind of shows how much people are struggling with like what they want versus what's right. Totally,
And the lines can get really blurry.
for sure.
Like a lot of the comments were saying they kept nudes to, hold on to memories, especially if someone died or they just like totally lost touch.
Yeah, that's when things get really complicated, I think. The psychology of it all, right? Are people being sentimental, or is it more about, I don't know, possessiveness or seeing the person as an object? It's a tough question everyone has to answer for themselves.
One guy, Storyman75, had a pretty interesting take. He was talking about keeping pictures of his ex who passed away and how those images, they became like these precious reminders of when they were young and in love.
Wow.
It kind of makes you think about it differently, right?
It does. It shows you how complicated human emotions are, Grief, loss, that feeling of wanting something back, it can totally change how we see these intimate images.
But even with all those emotions, we can't forget that those images could be used in a way that hurts someone or violates their privacy.
Right,
It's a
right.
big responsibility.
It is, and it makes you wonder, even if you have good intentions, can you really be sure everyone else does? This thread had some comments. They were talking about trophy albums and sharing without consent.
Yeah, some pretty dark stuff.
It was, and it reminds us that this isn't just a personal choice, it's part of a bigger problem. Image-based abuse is a real thing, and we have to be aware of the consequences, even if we don't mean any harm.
Exactly. And maybe that's where we need to focus the conversation. Instead of just thinking about keeping or deleting, maybe we need to talk about how to have digital intimacy in a way that's ethical and safe from the very beginning.
I think that's a great point. So what can people actually do to protect themselves and the people they're with?
Yeah, like are there steps people can take?
Well, first off, just talk to each other. Be open and honest with your partner. Talk about what you expect, what your boundaries are, and what'll happen to those pictures if you break up. Communication is key.
So it's about talking about it before things get messy.
Exactly. And remember, consent isn't just a one-time thing. Just because someone was okay with sharing a picture before doesn't mean they always will be. People change, relationships change, and we have to respect that someone might want those pictures deleted even if they were fine with them before.
That makes sense. It gives the person who shared the image the power to decide what happens to it.
Yeah. And it reinforces the idea that digital intimacy, it's like any other kind of intimacy. You need respect, trust, and you have to keep talking to each other.
So thinking about the people listening, what's the most important thing for them to remember? When they're trying to figure all this out, what should they keep in mind?
I think the biggest takeaway is to just be mindful. Think about how powerful these images are and how they could be used to hurt someone. Before you hit send or before you decide to keep a picture that was shared in a different time, just take a minute to think about what could happen.
So it's about making choices, not just doing what everyone else is or going with the flow.
Exactly. And if you're ever not sure, just choose respect and communication. Talk to your partner, put yourself in their shoes, and remember, you can always change your mind.
Wow. I mean, we've really gone deep on this one, haven't we? All the different things people do with intimate photos after a breakup. There's a lot to think about.
Definitely. It's not black and white, that's for sure.
And the Reddit thread, it was like a crash course in all the different opinions out there, all the different things people actually do.
For sure. It makes you think about consent and privacy, and how with digital images, it's not like they just disappear. They're out there.
Exactly. And what really stood out to me was even if someone thinks they're being careful, those pictures could still end up in the wrong hands.
Yeah, that's always a risk.
And we can't forget about people using those images to hurt someone. That whole idea of image-based abuse, it's a real problem.
Absolutely. It's a serious thing. And it shows how important it is to be aware and responsible when it comes to, anything intimate online.
So thinking about everything we've talked about, what do you think is the most important thing for people to remember?
That's a good question. I think more than anything, it's about talking to each other.
Communication, right?
Yeah, like talk about what you expect, what your boundaries are, what's okay and what's not, and what will happen to those pictures if things don't work out. That can prevent so much misunderstanding and hurt later on.
So it's about being proactive, making those choices together instead of just assuming things.
Right. And remember, consent isn't forever. Just because someone said yes to something before doesn't mean they feel the same way now. We have to respect that people change, relationships change, and someone might want those pictures gone even if they were okay with them at one point.
So to wrap things up, let's leave our listeners with something to think about.
Okay, I like that.
Imagine there was one rule, like a universal rule, about keeping intimate photos after a breakup. What would it be? What would make things safer and better for everyone?
Wow, that's a tough one, but it's definitely worth thinking about. And maybe even talking about it with your partner.
Absolutely. And if you're looking for more deep dives like this one, be sure to subscribe to Shauna Polidge's YouTube channel. That's where you'll find Voices of the Soul.
We're here to help you navigate this crazy modern world and hopefully give you the tools to make choices that you feel good about.
Thanks for joining us, everyone. Until next time, stay curious and keep those conversations going.